Today's story took place in Italy, specifically in the San Lorenzo neighborhood of Rome in 2018. Because of the specifics of the event, it shocked the entire country and made media headlines almost all over the world. Desiree Moratini, that's the name of the 16-year-old girl who was victimized in this case. She was born and raised in Cisterna de Latina, a town of about 37,000 people in the province of Latino, about 50 kilometers from Rome. Her grandparents were well known in the town. Her grandfather was a labor union activist and her grandmother was a lawyer. They never agreed with the relationship their daughter Barbara had with a man named Gianluca because he was considered one of the local drug lords. But despite this disagreement, the relationship continued, and at the age of 15, Barbara became pregnant. 9 months later, she had her first daughter Desiree, who eventually refused to carry her father's surname because of his bad reputation. Despite having such a young mother and a conflicted family, Desiree was a beautiful, sweet, and shy girl. She had a foot problem that caused her to be bullied a bit by boys her age. At the age of 16, the girl turned into a troubled and rebellious person and did not want to continue her studies at the agricultural school. Desiree was actually an artist, and with her abilities she even won a prize for her painting. That's why she wanted to study at an art school in Rome. The small town of Cisterna de Latina had nothing to offer this girl, so she traveled to Rome, with or without permission. There she made friends and gained access to illegal substances that no one in her town sold for fear of her father. After a while, Gianluca came after her to bring her home and even punched Desiree in the face a few times. She in turn reported him to the police station. Shortly before these events, Desiree had been arrested for selling Rivotril tablets, a sedative, to 2 other minors. Social services already considered her situation dangerous and said it was out of control and action needed to be taken to protect her. The officers also asked the juvenile court to place her in a rehabilitation center and attributed the girl's dangerous behavior to instability in her family. In fact, her grandmother was taking care of her, but she had no control over her. Unfortunately, the court did not take prompt action, and something terrible happened a few days later. On Thursday, October 18, 2018, Desiree drove to Rome, where she was apparently supposed to go to art school. The last thing her family heard was the phone call she made that day to say that she had missed the last bus back to Cisterna de Latino and that she would be spending the night in the Italian capital at a friend's house. This friend was Antonella, whom she had met a couple of weeks before these events in a drug den and who allegedly supplied her with illegal substances, although she admits only to having given the girl money to buy them. Antonella and Desiree went that night to the so-called Casa de la Droga, an abandoned building inhabited by violent people and vandals, a place well known and feared by residents of the San Lorenzo neighborhood. Desiree was also reportedly looking there for a tablet stolen or exchanged for illegal substances, as her mother insisted she must find it. According to Antonella, they both went to a place where a man she identifies as Afrikaans was cooking cocaine. Shortly thereafter, other men arrived and offered the girls alcohol. Antonella refused and claims that she tried to get her friend to do the same, but Desiree did not listen to her, so her friend left the place, leaving her there in the company of several men. According to later testimony, the men gathered there gave her illegal substances and told her it was methadone. In fact, Desiree was using a mixture of cannabinoids and alcohol. They wanted her to completely lose her ability to react to anything, and they succeeded. Having achieved their goal, the 4 men carried her to an empty container littered with trash where a discarded dirty mattress lay. For several hours, they took turns abusing the helpless young girl in front of several witnesses who were at the scene. The group ended the attack with at least one of the participants suggesting that medical services be called, as Desiree was clearly in a bad state and feared for her life. However, someone who was apparently the leader of the group shouted, "She'd rather die than we end up in jail," a phrase that was enough to scare away not only the accomplices to the crime but also the witnesses who were nearby. Desiree was mercilessly abandoned by the criminals at the scene of the crime. She was unconscious and without clothes. One woman told the press, concealing her identity, that she felt very sorry for the girl. So she went over to her, covered her with a sheet and gave her water and sugar to bring her to her senses. She claimed that Desiree was alive at the time and added that she regretted not doing something more. The next morning, an unknown person called emergency services to report a young girl. When officers arrived on scene, they found Desiree's lifeless body on a dirty mattress. With the appearance of the body, an investigation began. The girl's parents were notified of the event and the body was taken away for examination. The investigation itself was not easy at all, as no one in the neighborhood was willing to turn in dangerous criminals. All homeless, drug addicts, outcasts, none of them wanted to appear as snitches. But hours after the body was discovered, a Senegalese national came voluntarily to the police station and claimed that on the night of Desiree's death, he arrived at the scene shortly after midnight and found a woman screaming next to the girl's body. The woman claimed that the girl was dead and said that there were 6 or 7 people at the scene, some Africans and Arabs, adding that Desiree was attacked by 3 or 4 men. While the investigation was underway, the autopsy results of Desiree's body revealed the full horror of the last hours of her life. Laboratory tests confirmed that she had been drugged with a lethal cocktail of illegal substances and that she had also suffered periods of asphyxiation, presumably when her rapists attacked her and covered her mouth to prevent her from screaming. It was determined that there were multiple attackers and that Desiree was most likely a virgin at the time of the abuse. The final cause of death was cardiac and respiratory arrest. But the worst part is that she lived for about 10 hours after the rape, and if someone had called emergency services, she could have been saved. On October 30, 2018, family, friends, and hundreds of young people and residents of Cisterna de Latino gathered in front of the church to say goodbye to Desiree with flowers and heart-shaped pink and white balloons. To applause and fireworks, a white casket with her remains was carried in front of the church. Several young people unfurled a huge banner demanding justice. During the sermon, the local parish priest appealed to those in charge of public affairs, big or small, central or peripheral, to monitor, control, and intervene in time to combat all forms of violence without waiting for this violence to erupt and repeat itself. A few days before the funeral, 2 men were arrested, Mamadou Garo, 26, and Brian Minto, 43, both from Senegal and in the country illegally, thanks to investigations and the testimony of some witnesses. A few hours later, also arrested were Elino Chima, 46, from Nigeria, who had a residence permit in the Italian capital for humanitarian reasons, and Yusuf Salia, from Chambia, who had fled to the south of the city of Ford in the Apulia region and was hiding near a center for emigrants. Weapons and banned substances were seized from the detainees. They were eventually charged with gang sexual assault, possession and distribution of prohibited substances, and premeditated murder. The prosecutor in charge of the case, Maria Paulo Tomesel, called the 4 detainees animals who raped a very young and defenseless girl without any pity. Laboratory tests on 4 subjects confirmed the presence of each subject's DNA in Desiree's fingernails, clothing, and body. The investigation also led to the arrest of Antonella, Desiree's alleged friend who had accompanied her that day to the location where she was murdered. Soon after, since she knew that the girl was underage, but still helped her get the banned substances, and was even said to have given them to her on previous occasions. In the following days, an appeals court dropped the murder charge against detainee Elino Chima, finding that the defendant had participated in the rape but had not given the girl illegal substances. However, a few days later, this charge was added again because laboratory tests found Chima's DNA in a bottle of methadone. It should be noted that one of the accused, Yusuf Salia, filed a complaint against the parents for not keeping an eye on their daughter. The trial against the 4 took place on December 4, 2019. On that day, Yusuf Salia said he was not responsible for the minor's death and withdrew the complaint he had filed against her parents on November 14. The court went to the scene of the crime with the inspection and lawyers to be able to compare the places where the events took place with the testimonies of witnesses. Speaking of witnesses, it is worth mentioning that 4 of them were severely beaten to prevent them from testifying. On the same day, the deputy prosecutor requested life imprisonment for the 4 defendants, with daily solitary confinement for 1 year. Finally, on June 19, 2021, after nearly 10 hours of deliberation, the judge of the 3rd Criminal Court issued the verdict, finding the 4 defendants guilty. Mamadou and Yusuf Salia were sentenced to life imprisonment, Elino Chima to 27 years in prison, and Brian Minto to 24 years and 6 months in prison. Barbara Mariatini, Desiree's mother, was disappointed with the verdict as she expected 4 life sentences and said she did not get justice for her daughter. I have been unable to find anything concrete about Antonella's fate in press reports, but she may have been released. Desiree's brutal murder caused a huge stir among Italians. On the one hand, much of the population showed their feelings against the immigrants, claiming that they were damaging the country's economy and services, as well as making Italians the victims of their crimes. However, more judicious voices emphasize that not all immigrants can be lumped into one group and that most of them are not criminals. A few days after the events, hundreds of people demonstrated in the streets surrounding the abandoned structure where the crime was committed. They claimed that they had long been taking steps to close it down to prevent it from being used as a den for drug traffickers and other undesirables. San Lorenzo, a neighborhood of university students that used to be an important tourist destination with known bohemian activity, turned into a desert that no one wanted to visit because of its dangers. This forced residents of the neighborhood to sit in their homes or risk becoming victims of crime. Residents of the nearby neighborhoods reported that when a shipment of illegal substances arrived at the site, criminals would launch fireworks from the spot to alert their customers to the availability of the goods. The president of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani, said that what happened to Desiree should be the last tragedy in Italy, and especially in Rome. Tajani called the city derelict and emphasized that moral and social degradation is evident and that it is necessary to strengthen police control, especially at night. The mayor of Rome announced that the authorities intend to demolish the building where the crime took place, saying that as a woman, she cannot tolerate such a heinous crime. A red bench dedicated to Desiree's memory was unveiled in a square in Rome. The ceremony was attended by her mother, who expressed her hope that the bench would become a refuge and a place of comfort for those who feel the pain and discomfort of loneliness. Looking at this case in detail, almost everything that could go wrong ended up going wrong. Life as the daughter of a 15-year-old girl and a drug lord was never normal. A broken family was not a support for a creative and troubled mind, nor was it a refuge for someone who, with a physical handicap, felt humiliated in front of others. What do you think about this story? Write your opinion in the comments and subscribe to my YouTube channel and watch other videos.